Welcome back to the TV pilot graveyard, where today we're delving into the messy, heartwarming and often hilarious world of relationship sitcoms. From the quirky dynamics of an extended family to the ever-present challenges of married life and the trials of raising children, these pilots aim to mirror the everyday dramas and joys of human connection. But relationships can be complicated, and so too, it seems, are the sitcoms about them. Join us as we unearth the families who never quite made it to our living rooms, the couples whose chemistry wasn't quite right, and the relatives who stayed buried in the TV pilot graveyard. Angela Ince and Shirley Lowe co-authored a novel called Swapping, published in 1987, which suggests the book was the inspiration for the pilot. The novel delves into the complexities of relationships, identity and social expectations, particularly from a female perspective. The novel focuses on two seemingly idyllic, or at least well-established marriages that undergo significant disruption. The central event, as the title suggests, is a swapping of partners. Anne Forrester-Jones is an English country housewife, seemingly content with her domestic routine in Hampshire. Her husband, Anthony, is an advertising executive. Felicia Harmon is an attractive, semi-successful actress married to Donald, a workaholic American banker based in London. The catalyst for the swap is Anthony's affair with Felicia. When Felicia's husband, Donald, discovers the affair, he kicks Felicia out. Anthony then takes Felicia home to the country, effectively forcing Anne out of her established home and life. This leaves both Anne and Felicia in miserable, uprooted situations. The plot then explores what happens when these two women, from different backgrounds and with different personalities, find their lives intertwined and are forced to redefine themselves outside of their original marital contexts. While the premise sounds dramatic, given the BBC pilot was a sitcom, the novel also employs a good deal of humour in its exploration of these complex situations, focusing on the absurdities and ironies of human relationships. A Publishers Weekly review described it as this very funny tale of infidelity in the English upper middle class. A Goodreads review mentions the co-writers painting a utopian world of divorce where, after the initial shock and hurt of betrayal, both women settle into lives that are better for them and much more to their liking. This suggests an optimistic, perhaps even empowering resolution for the female characters, where their independence ultimately leads to greater satisfaction. In essence, Swapping appears to have been a character-driven comedic drama that uses the disruptive event of infidelity and partner exchange to explore deeper questions about female autonomy, self-discovery and the evolution of relationships in the face of changing societal norms. The subject matter might not have been what the BBC wanted at the time, so it was never broadcast. What does an actress do when she's been in one of the most popular TV sitcoms and one of the most popular TV soaps? She asks a well-known and respected sitcom writer to create a sitcom for her to star in. Well, at least that's what Wendy Richard did when she resigned from EastEnders. And who better to ask than David Croft, the writer of Are You Being Served, that she starred in for 14 years. Wendy said, "I phoned David last year and said, I've resigned from EastEnders, so if you fancy getting your writing hat on again." And a couple of weeks later I got a script through the post with a lovely letter from David. In an interview with the Daily Mirror in 2007, Richards said, "My character won't be glamorous because she's a lady of a certain age, but she will be smart. She's Miss Brahms a few years down the line." She continued, "I'm just so excited, it's going to be brilliant." The pilot was filmed in Bury St Edmunds in 2007 and follows the story of a brother and sister played by Richards and Les Dennis, who run a wool shop in Romford. They discover they are the two remaining heirs to a Russian throne. There's then a plot involving the gold deposits of the Russian country and an assassination attempt while British intelligence try to protect them. The plot beautifully blends the mundane with the ridiculously high stakes, combining classic British fish-out-of-water comedy with international espionage farce. The cast, including Philip Maddock and Burt Kwok, further solidifies its intended tone as broad comedy. Some people have seen the pilot of Here Comes the Queen, whether by bootleg or actually being involved in the production. On the Digital Spy Forum, a contributor wrote, "OK, it's no The Office, but on the other hand, it's not Lab Rats. Seriously, it's hard to judge, as this is obviously a rough cut with no proper post-production applied, which can make the world of difference. But I think the ship has sailed for the Croft-Perry-Lloyd comedy format. It had its place during a certain time, but then so did fascism, consumption and the Blambarda, and no one wants to see them knocking on the door again." The producers gave the pilot its best chance at being picked up, including showing it at the MIPCOM Trade Film Festival in Cannes in October 2007. An IMDb reviewer summed up the likely reason for it not being made into a series. As I recall, the pilot was turned down by all UK television channels as being not up to standard. It was an old idea that David Croft had tried to sell to the BBC years before as a vehicle for John Inman and Molly Sugden. A DVD was due to be released shortly after the pilot was broadcast. However, since the pilot never aired, the DVD was scrapped. Merry Widows does not sound like a laugh a minute from the initial description of the pilot. Sitcom about 3 generations of women who have all lost their husbands before the age of 30. It certainly has some top grade comedy actresses in the lead roles: Natalie Cassidy, Michelle Gomez and Miriam Margolyes. It was written by Susan Nixon, who was responsible for 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps. Given the specific focus on 3 generations of women who have lost their husbands, it's quite a unique premise. I've watched the completed pilot. It begins near the end of the burial of Billy's husband Matthew, with his army comrades present. A bugler sounds the last post that resembles the sound of a drain being unblocked. That sets the tone for the humour. At the wake, after a few awkward words, Billy passionately kisses the vicar. It sounds like they've been having an affair. The 3 widowed women reminisce in the kitchen, the 2 older women effectively competing for how grief-stricken they were when their husbands died. We're shown flashbacks to the last times they saw their partners. Then we see Billy's flashback. The vicar was her husband. She's been talking to him as if he's still there, and it turns out Renee and Jackie still talk to their husbands. The funeral is a good catalyst for comedy moments, but the flashbacks would be what could have made the pilot viable for a series and gives us opportunities to see the deceased husbands and their wives' earlier years. It's clearly a Susan Nixon script. There were some suitably awkward family conversations. The studio audience were very enthusiastic. The American Life in Pieces chronicles the lives of 3 generations of a family, with each episode told from different perspectives. While not directly about widowhood, it explores family dynamics and life's ups and downs. The pilot was recorded in May 2011 at BBC Television Centre. Pilots are often screened for executives or test audiences, and the feedback might have not been positive enough to warrant a full series. The specific humour, character dynamics or overall feel might not have resonated with BBC commissioners, or perhaps it didn't quite fit the tone they were aiming for. It was probably too dark and irreverent for a mainstream slot. Led Astray was a sitcom written for Cilla Black and Paul O'Grady. Cilla played a version of herself, an ex-TV presenter, and Paul was her long-lost half-brother. His character, Arthur, was in prison but is released with the help of some forged documents. He then finds himself living with his half-sister. In November 2018, writers Lawrence Marks and Maurice Gran revealed the plot of the show and talked about how much fun they had at rehearsals, working with 2 thoroughgoing professionals. They even referred to Cilla and Paul as television royalty. Apparently there were 8,000 applications for the 280 tickets to see the October 2013 studio recording. According to the BBC Audience Unit, it was by far the biggest application they have ever received for a new show. The scenario is reminiscent of Home to Roost, where a teenage son, whose parents are separated, turns up on his dad's doorstep having been thrown out by his mother. John Thor starred as the divorced middle-aged man, with Rhys Dinsdale as the teenage son. The humour stemmed from the generational clash and the disruption of a settled life by an unexpected arrival. Led Astray would have had played on the disruption aspect, given Arthur's criminal background in electronic tag. Another sitcom with a similar theme is Birds of a Feather, where two sisters live together when their husbands have been sent to prison. The similarity does not end there. Lawrence Marks and Maurice Gran also wrote Birds of a Feather. Everything was looking good for a series to be commissioned. So what happened? It wasn't BBC management axing the show. Sadly, the stars themselves decided not to continue. In March 2014, Paul O'Grady told the Sun newspaper, "We did a pilot, but we didn't like the hours. I mean, Cilla is 70, I'm 58, and you can't do it anymore. You have to take that into consideration." However, it might have been another year or so by the time a commissioned show was ready to be filmed, which, as things turned out, would not have gone ahead anyway. Cilla's health was deteriorating. Then on the 1st of August 2015, she suffered a fall at home and died from a subsequent stroke. Paul O'Grady said, "A light went off in his life when she died." If you cringe at the thought of those eternally joyful families where every day is an adventure and life is for living no matter what goes wrong, then The Berries is not for you. Ardal O'Hanlon stars as husband and father Bruce, while Sarah Hadland plays wife Vanessa, mother to their 3 teenage children. A source at ITV said, "It's a comedy about a happy family whose overly positive, rose-tinted view of the world is their undoing and will be great for viewers. No matter the situation, the Berries have a positive outlook. They all get stuck in a lift together. The Berries will find the fun to be had. Family bonding time. If they go on holiday and it rains every day, that's no problem." The pilot, filmed in London in March 2016, came as ITV was desperate to strengthen its comedy offering, but as you already know, if it's on this list, the pilot was never seen and a series was not commissioned. I might be wrong about the cringe factor. The Berries could sound like a concept ripe for hilarious satire, depending entirely on the execution. But be serious, it's an ITV sitcom after all. The core premise, a family with an overly positive, rose-tinted view of the world, whose optimism is their undoing, must mean that they treat Finding the Milker's Gone Off and Thermonuclear Armageddon with the same laissez-faire attitude. They certainly picked the right stars. O'Hanlon's bewildered innocence and Hadland's ability to play flustered or slightly off-kilter would be great for conveying this particular type of delusion. The humour comes from the contrast between the family's cheerful outlook and the grim reality of their situations, but perhaps their relentless positivity annoys strangers, friends, or even each other. They live in a world that doesn't conform to their happy view. Their positive mindset isn't based on genuine solutions or success, but a stubborn refusal to acknowledge negativity, which on balance sounds like they need a reality check. They sound potentially awful to be around, although I suppose that's precisely where the comedy is supposed to come from. There are parallels with Friday Night Dinner. Whilst it isn't about an overly positive family, it perfectly captures the essence of a family whose quirks and collective dynamic lead to their undoing, at least persistent comedic chaos, whenever they try to navigate normal life. It excels at showing how a family's internal world clashes with external expectations. Both shows put a specific heightened family dynamic at the centre of their comedy. For Friday Night Dinner, it's the odd rituals, annoying parents and sibling rivalry. For The Berries, it's the relentless positivity. Andy Yerlich was a relatively new writer, having previously only written or co-written 6 short films of 8 to 20 minutes each and 1 30-minute comedy drama. Only 2 of those productions seem to have been broadcast. He was also one of 3 writers on an episode of the 2015 sci-fi drama Eve. The apparent lack of success of most of his previous projects is not necessarily an indication of how successful this pilot was. Many factors affect success or failure, and they're not necessarily within the control of the writer. ITV's comedy track record has been a mixed bag with sitcoms. They often lean towards more populist broad humour. The Berries might have been too niche or high concept for their traditional audience, or simply not executed with enough universal appeal. It's a concept that could have been very funny if handled well, playing on the relatable frustration of dealing with people who just can't see the negative side of anything. The Berries is a great example of how a seemingly simple premise can be incredibly difficult to execute successfully. Bearing in mind that this pilot features David Tennant voicing a teenage girl's heart, it could be a candidate for the most offbeat episode of this video series. However, it is about relationships, or rather the heart that has just been operated on, telling the young girl not to waste her life and find a partner. The girl, Liddy, is played by Fern Deacon. She calls her heart Lump. Lump is scheming to get her together with hot nurse Kim and live a little. Fern Deacon, a Glaswegian, said about Tennant, "He was such a class act, bless him. I'm Scottish and always intended for Lump to sound Glaswegian, and I think David was just pleased to be asked to be Scottish for once." Director Lila Vandenberg said there will be more romance, more buddy comedy, all the feels, some big twists, a lot of laughs, and maybe an appearance by Lump in the flesh. Although the 2 10-minute pilot episodes were made by Sky Studios, there was no guarantee Sky would commission a series. The pilot was due to be screened at the South by Southwest Film Festival and the BFI Flair London LGBTQI+ Film Festival in 2020, which were both cancelled. However, it was shown virtually at Outfest in 2020. Lila Vandenberg said, "Sky commissioned the 2-episode pilot, but we need a distributor broadcaster to commission a full series." As we close the family album on these unaired relationship sitcoms, we're left contemplating the domestic affection and chaos that never reached our screens. Was there a family unit just waiting to become as dysfunctional and beloved as the Royals? We might have seen another 2.4 children. It's a poignant thought, knowing that some of these potentially iconic families never got their chance. Yet the television landscape is already rich with some incredible family sitcoms that remind us of the enduring power and endless humour of our nearest and dearest. If you enjoyed this dive into the unseen side of British comedy, hit the like button, subscribe for more content like this and ring the bell so you don't miss my next video. Thank you for watching.